Bat Force Radio.
Bat Force Radio is rated M for mature, or should that be immature?
Hey guys, Dustin Nguyen.
Hey, this is Scott Snyder.
This is Paul Dini.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
You're listening to Bat Force Radio.
This is Tom King. I write Batman Bitch, and this is Bat Force Radio.
Welcome back to Bat Force Radio, the Batman and DC podcast with no limits. Tonight's roundtable consists of Legends of Lego Batman, California.
Oh, cheers.
The Bat Force Times in New York. And oh, cheers, I'm Robin Cross in Canada. So tonight's guest is an illustrator who's been creating stories with the likes of Alan Moore, Robert Kirkman, Jason Aaron, and Scott Snyder for more than 20 years, while working on characters like Superman, the X-Men and Avengers, Spider-Man, the JLA, and Swamp Thing. His work on Wonder Woman Earth 1 with Grant Morrison earned him a Schuster Award in 2017. And this week, in Batman number 69, he gave us the final chapter of the Nightmare story arc with Tom King. Joining us tonight from La Belle Province, it's always nice when I get to have a fellow Canadian on the show, Mr. Yanick Paquette.
Hey guys,
awesome. All
right. I'm gonna lay my awesome French Canadian accent over that podcast. Oh. It's gonna be so much Belle Province. It's gonna be almost too much.
Can never have too much. But thanks so much. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us here tonight. How has life been?
It's my pleasure, guys. Well, I work a lot more than I'm supposed to. Usually, I always favor a long-term project, which I can have my own lifestyle of traveling and spending time with my family. But for some reason, the beginning of the year has been super extreme. I did that Batman that just came out that we need to talk about. But almost simultaneously, I'm doing a Superman. I don't know what's the name of it now. It did change a few times. Giant Size, Leviathan Rising. That's the name now. Yeah, with Bendis. So in that thing, and initially it was 20 pages, and then it grew to 40. I mean, it's 80 pages with other people contributing to it. But my share of it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and now I have to, So I work a lot more than I'm comfortable with. But
by the time that issue comes out, it's going to be about 300 pages.
Oh no, I'm afraid not. No, actually they can, because I think it's coming out next month or something like that. I got 4 pages to do, and so I see the end. I see the end of my marathon of drawing, and then I'll take it easy a little bit more.
Should be called Superman Leviathan Page Count Rising.
Yeah.
This is the first time we've had the chance to speak with you, so if you don't mind, I would like to take people through what got you started. Like what made you decide you wanted to be an artist, and this was what you wanted to do with your life? What was that moment?
Well, it's a long story. Initially, comic was not a realistic plan at first. I was aiming towards science. And the intention was biology, so I was going to biology, and then eventually, it turned out it was a lot. Well, I was going to insect, the part of entomology, which is the study of insect, which was my childhood thing. I was collecting insect and all that thing, and so even as a kid, I thought I'm gonna do these Indiana Jones adventure type lifestyle and going to jungle, finding cool insect, and it's going to be all sexy and stuff, but in romantic. And as it turned out, entomology and biology is not that. It's a lot more lab. It's a lot more grounded in reality. And I had to see if this was a direction that was still exciting for me. And at the same time, that was the beginning of the 90s. Like 92 or something, and at the moment comics was, it's a big boom of it's an epic image era with comics selling in the millions and millions, and I thought, well, maybe that's an option, because through all my studies I was always drawing stuff on the side and for the fun, in student journal and everything. But coming from Quebec, for me, drawing for the American was something unrealistic. It's too disconnected from my own reality. And but at the same time, because the comic industry was getting so much traction, comic book conventions started to reach places like Montreal, and that's where I've met French Canadian like me that was doing comics for a living, and suddenly that became a viable option. And I just took a year and a half, tried to learn everything I could in a very scientific way. I would say I just imported my work ethic into learning the anatomy and the perspective, the math of it. And I took it so seriously that I've managed to evolve quite fast and, eventually get some work done for professional publisher.
What was your first step getting into the industry?
Oh, so by the time I was sort of good enough to get anything published, the industry was crashing. So that's 95, 94, 95. And so most of the smaller press were just getting out of business. It's just a huge crash, the post-image craziness. And they were looking to hire kids from super far away so they would not be sued or, reached by these people. They're somehow planning not to pay. And I would say that my first few, I can't even remember those small press because they went out of the business so fast. But my first few projects were for companies that just went bankrupt the moment I sent the page in. And so they would publish the thing, of course, but they would never send the original back. And they would never pay me. And that was like a trying time, I would say, until I reached Topps Comics. And at the time, Topps, now I think they're still doing cards, are they? But at the time, they were doing comics. And so they had franchise from Fox, like something called Space Above and Beyond, but also Xena, Warrior Princess, and X-File. And because I'm French Canadian, I was kind of closer to the European market and could do a little bit of likenesses when I draw. And at the time, for my generation, the big tendency was the Capcom, Jeff Matsuda, Joe Mad type younger artists that want to push into the industry. And so these guys were discarded from the get-go, I guess, from Fox because they couldn't draw the actors. And that's how I've managed to sneak into those places. And I did adaptation of X-Files and some Xena and a show called Space Above and Beyond. And so that was my first actual published work. I wasn't that great, but it was good enough to get those likenesses through the door at Fox. And eventually Topps just went bankrupt like every other company I've worked with. But by the time, at that time I was getting good enough that I could make a play for more major company like DC and stuff like that. Because the thing is, when you start to draw, you can work at home, try to be as good as possible, but not until you get to mass produce comics. Like by the time you've done your first 3 comics, you're 9 times as good as when you started. As time goes on, as your career progresses, and now I've been doing that thing for 20 years, I would say that my next comics maybe it's marginally better depending on the time I have, but the progression that you do at first is just massive. And so these small press, even though they never play me, they got me to draw and get better and better and good enough to reach DC in a viable form as an artist. So
it gave you, while it was giving you the experience working on that stuff, it was also giving you a resume.
Yeah, and I was sending Xerox and photocopies of pages by mail. I'm old enough that all of this was before email. And so I was stamp and stuff on envelopes and sending it to everybody. But by the time I was out of Topps Comic, I could send actual comics to DC and say, these are my 3 last comics. And this is just giving you a level of cred that you don't get by sending 4 photocopies stapled together. This shows that you're a professional. You can get a project, to the finish line, and that's how I've eventually managed to get what's my first job at DC. So DC is the first major that gave me my chance, and I did. Oh yeah, I did something called Tomorrow Woman. You guys know that at all? It's a spin-off on one of those characters from Grant Morrison. I think he did it in GLA. It's a robot woman, and there was an event called Girl Frenzy, and it's just like an event of a bunch of books featuring a female character from DC, which was somehow obscure. And that's my first DC book, the Tomorrow Woman comic. So it's just one issue.
And at that point, did you ever envision your career going so far that you would be going on to work with all of the famous names that you have so far?
Yeah.
No, I've been lucky. As I look at the kind of writer I've been, getting Grant Morrison and Alan Moore on the same list is something. Crazy. I don't know why. I just got lucky, and plus I think I'm always very interested to telling the story, and I'm always putting the story first. And some previous generation, there is a generation of image that try to do the more exciting image as possible, sometime on a page. And I think some of the writers that were more into the storytelling aspect kind of seek me out. And I think it's just, because I work with Alan, it just created some envy, I guess, from the others, and they really wanted to work with me. I did survive Alan Moore, so for sure I gotta do something good with them. And by the time I've reached, doing 2 years with Alan and then and stuff with Grant and everything, so people somehow assume that I know what I'm doing because of that. I guess, and it just get the ball rolling.
You've you've drawn so many different characters for the big two with so many different writers. Has any book stuck out, like any book or character stuck out to you where you're like, I love drawing this character or this run?
Well, I guess Swamp Thing has got to be that thing, and I'm assuming because of my first love of biology, there is some sort of link between my first life and my second life, in which I can dig into nature. I don't know. Maybe there's something personal, but even deeper than that. When I discovered the American industry, as I told you, being French Canadian, I've read mostly European, comic book, like Asterix, Tintin, these things. And my first encounter with the American comic was an adaptation of I have no idea what it might be called in English. But it was a circus story, like a bunch of freaks, and it was a Wrightson book.
No.
What's
Wow.
circus? What is it?
Frankenstein, right?
No, that's the Frankenstein. It was just a bunch of like a circus of freak shows and a bunch of monsters. And because Wrightson is such a master of light, and he could create so much drama. It made a huge contrast with the kind of stuff you can find with Asterix and Tintin. I mean, I love the European material, but the level of drama that Wrightson would put in the pages made this thing completely from another planet and very attractive to me. And so I started to seek this guy out, Bernie Wrightson, whatever I could find in French at my local library. And eventually I went all the way to Swamp Thing. And Swamp Thing was probably maybe the first actual American comic, proper comic that I studied and looked at. And so, when I was leaving slightly comics and leaning more towards science, I've almost gave up entirely the comic thing as something from my childhood. And I discovered the Alan Moore Alan Moore run of Swamp Thing, and that brought me back into, oh no, wait a minute, comics can do like all sort of thing. It's not just naive stuff; it's super complex. It can go anywhere, and the American are ready to embrace the weird and the bizarre and the complex and the mature material. And so that brought me back in, and I stayed into comics, and I became eventually a comic book artist, and I've done all these characters. And when I was doing Batman Inc. with Grant, and the New 52 got announced internally, a little, for me as a surprise. I was not planning that at all. And the idea, my schedule was, I was to do 5 issues of Batman Inc. with Grant, and then we would do Wonder Woman, which at the time was not a Earth One book. It was like a regular, I think, or like a maxi series or all star. I don't quite remember. So that was the plan, and then somebody else would take over Batman Inc. and that was it. But then they announced the New 52, and they offered Grant Action Comics, and that's too good to pass. So he went for that, and I was exclusive, but I had nothing else to do. That the plan was all changed. And through Batman Inc., I was doing Batman Inc., and Detective was being written by Scott Snyder. And the thing with Scott is that we were sharing that same email, the Bat Office kind of email chain. that story is becoming so intricate. I creating a parenthesis here. 1 year I was in San Diego, and some kid comes to me with his portfolio, and it's amazing. It's breathtaking. And he couldn't show his work to anybody at the time, at DC or anywhere else, because there were so many portfolio reviews that what they were doing a raffle first, and if you're getting picked, then they will look at your portfolio, and the guy didn't got the raffled, so he couldn't show his work. But he was like going back to Brazil, showing his stuff around, like a bit depressed, and that guy was Rafael Albuquerque. And Rafa was like ridiculously awesome already, right? And he was publishing stuff in Brazil, and I said, this is unacceptable. And I brought him to the DC booth, and I got in touch with Mark Charles and said, man, you need to look at this guy, even though we're back channeling this whole thing. And I think he got in the job like in the next month on Blue Beetle. And I kept in touch. I mean, me and Rafa were still good friends to this day. And so I was following Rafa adventure at the time on American Vampire. And that's how I knew Scott, and Scott and I were sharing this email chain. And then New 52 came about. And we discovered that Scott and I are both big Swamp Thing fan. And they offered me a list of characters to choose from for a regular series on the New 52, and Swamp Thing was there on the list, and I knew Scott was involved in it, and so I'd no other choice but to feel like, oh, I'm going back home. This is a sign. Swamp Thing has been there as an important pivotal point in my life, and in my path as a comic book artist. This for sure, this was the only choice for me, and so I did it. And because it was so personal, I tried to dig into the history of Swamp Thing in order to create what kind of content I would do for it. And so looking back at what Steve Bissett would do for the layouts, and to me, the joy of Swamp Thing is, I mean, he's a great character, but when you read a comic book from Alan Moore, or even in some degree the Wrights and Ron, that you're in for a visual feast. It's part of the process. You're gonna get a book, it's a character, whatever. This is the story, but you're also going to get, your retina will be happy. You're going to get a lush, awesome visual, and it's going to be classic. It's going to be with light and shadows and rich. And so that was part of almost an extension of what to expect with the book. So I brought that in, and I tried to homage a little bit of the experimental layout style of Bissett, but with my own language, which is a little bit more structured. And it just created something that reflect back a little bit on the past of Swamp Thing and on my own past. And for these reasons, it was a lot more personal than, say, my run of Gambit, for instance, which was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it was great, but it wasn't as personal.
Did you get to see the Swamp Thing trailer that premiered yesterday?
Yeah, it was just an ad coming out of the the water. Yeah, I've seen it. Well, we'll see. I mean, still could be awesome, could be terrible. Who knows?
That's true.
I feel good about it with James Wan involved. I have high hopes.
Oh, James Wan.
Yeah, well, hopefully. When I did my 2 years of Swamp Thing, well, the first year and a half, and then another story. I went to a show in Germany with Mahmoud Azra, which is a good friend, and this guy invited us to Germany to do a tour of stores and stuff. And I asked Mahmoud to come with me because I don't want to be alone there. I don't know that guy, but I know Mahmoud, and Mahmoud was not that far. And so we had great adventure in Germany. But one time, this guy, after we've done all those days of signing in comic book store, the last day, he said, I want to show you something. And he brings us to his basement. And there we watched the Swamp Thing movie, the old one. I don't know, there's two, right? I think we watched the first one, which I've never seen before. I had no idea what to expect, in German. And it was a weird experience. It's a weird film, that one. It's a weird thing. So it goes to show that it could be weird. Swamp Thing itself is a guarantee of greatness. But yeah, we'll see. I'm excited. So.
Yeah, as far as your art, for me, Swamp Thing is the ultimate character for your art. Your run with Scott looked fantastic, and probably about 5 years ago, I watched you at a local con where I am here in Windsor. I watched you Swamp Thing commission, I think you were doing. And for those of us who don't understand how art is created, we don't understand how it all comes together. When you first started the piece, I'm watching and you're just making these just looks like random splotches of color. And I'm looking and thinking, oh, what is he doing here?
He has like a brain damage.
Yeah, it's all these splotches, but then after you have enough splotches, you started just adding lines that connected everything, and in a matter of seconds, it turned from splotches into, that's what he was doing. And
yeah, what is that? That's one of the joys of Swamp Thing. You have a huge liberty of doing almost whatever you want, and always kind of makes sense. Always, it's a monster. If you mess some of the symmetry, it's still good. If you're way too textured, and it's kind of the color is all merging into a goo, we're still good. I mean, you can't go wrong with a guy, which is not the same thing with Wonder Woman. if you want to do a commission arc and then the color is all over the place and the eye is not even and it's all weird, it's not a great Wonder Woman. But Swamp Thing, you always can pretend it's intentional. So that's why when I'm tired, I'll do a Swamp Thing, like when I do free sketches or something like that. I know Swamp Thing will always come out all right. And amazingly, I know my Batman will always come out okay. Because one time I did a convention years ago in Mexico at a time where there always kind of are in financial crisis over there, but that was particularly bad. And there was a lot of fans. And they couldn't afford anything that I had to sell because, at shows that's, I've lowered my price, but couldn't do it. So I figured, I'm going to do for dirt cheap, just character ads, just ads. But it's going to be either Batman or, what was the other? Catwoman? I don't know, like a girl, but maybe Wonder Woman. But everybody went for Batman, and there was like a line of people wanting Batman. And I did in that weekend. I don't know how many ads of Batman, but so many it became almost like signing my own name, just drawing these faces as like a printer almost. And it made my Batman head sketch is impossible to miss. To corrupt or whatever. It's always solid and kind of look the same also. But yeah, that weekend of working on that single face made it so that I can't screw it up anymore. So I can always rely on that.
You should have kept the first one and the last one. So you could compare.
See if there is any progress at all.
It's funny that you just mentioned that, because I was listening to this fine art podcast yesterday, and there was this instructor that he tells half of his students to just make one pot, but as perfect as you can, and he tells the other half, make 100 pots. They don't have to be perfect at all, but just make. And he said the ones who made 100 pots could get a more perfect pot, finer than the one who just focused on one pot. It's interesting the way you just said about drawing Batman that much, and then all of a sudden you said you can't get it wrong because it's like etched in your brain now how to draw Batman or whatever. So
yeah, it's almost muscle memory at this point. I mean, it's not an original drawing, but if people when I do commission art, this is not the Batman I do because this is like very generic thing for me. I mean, it's looking great. It's all right, but I need to give people a little bit more originality, a little bit more, because I don't even consider this like as a drawing. It's almost just like drawing my name. Kind of. It's not anything. But yeah, it's a weird process. That I've done something at sometimes for so many times that it became like the pattern of it is just being etched in my brain forever. And it's probably the last good drawing I'll be able to do on my deathbed too.
you just keep drawing them over and over.
Yeah, when I could do anything anymore because I'm too crazy or old or arthritic, but then I can do this Batman. This is the last drawing I would be able to produce.
Legends, you better get that commission, boy.
Yeah, I got kind of a two-part question here. Do you prefer to draw traditionally or digitally? And then how do you determine, like with this last issue, I know you said you drew digitally. How do you determine if it's going to be inks and pencils or if it's going to be drawn digitally?
All right. So, I when I was drawing on paper, because now, first of all, it's a bit of a spoiling of the end of the story. I'm all digital now. So everything I do is digital except at shows when I do produce an original for a collector. But when I was drawing on paper, I was using a light box. So I would do like one sheet of paper of 11 by 17, and then I would break down the panels and do a little bit of rough of the anatomy, and maybe, if I'm lucky, a rough of a perspective grid. And then I would lay upon that first paper, like another sheet. In true transparency, I would clean stuff up and maybe do a full perspective grid on a third sheet that I could move around slightly to adjust to the panel. And then I would do another sheet, and I would just pile stuff up like this until I get all the information I feel I need to venture into the pencil on the final board. And sometimes there was like 4 pieces of paper on these boards. And so it occurred to me that this is kind of like working in Photoshop without Photoshop, with layers.
Right, with the layers, yeah.
So, but without Photoshop. So it's like the prehistoric Photoshop, software, which is just this huge table. And to me, it was kind of obvious that one day, if the technology allowed me to work on a table, that I could just pile all these things in a perfect transparency like Photoshop, but then draw on it. Because I was sharing a studio, and there was some people having the old Wacom tablet. I mean, the bamboo and stuff like that, where you can take your pencil, your stylus, and work on a surface, and then it will duplicate that movement on the screen. And I was trying to do circle with that. You draw a circle, and then it's happening on the screen, but it's all off and crooked because I've been working on a paper and my pencil was touching whatever stuff is happening. There was a weird disconnect. It's like writing upside down or something. It didn't work. I couldn't do it. And so I was patient, and I was waiting for a moment where the Cintiq tablet would be a reality. And when it did, I just bought it, knowing full well that this is already the way I work, and this will just up stuff up. And I did it. The first ever thing I did on a Cintiq tablet was the cover of Batman Inc. #1, which is a Batman jumping out of like the sky with buildings and stuff. Yeah. But at the time, I couldn't trust any inking on it. That was just because I was a penciler. Was my pencil process, and I would print it on blue very light, and I would give it to my inker, Michel Lacombe, which would ink the stuff. And sometimes, because we were sharing a studio, I would come back and ink some aspect of it, or make some modification in pencil. So a lot of these originals are hybrids, a bit of blue line, a bit of pencil, a bit of retouching of inks, and Michel would ink some aspects. Sometimes he would just print out on the board, instead of blue, he would print it in black element that was already kind of old form and didn't really need any inking. And as that project evolved, near the end of it, I was doing a monthly book with Grant Morrison, and I'm not super fast, and Grant was not always on time with the script. So sometimes it was kind of epic finals of deadline, and at the end, on the last issue, it was almost impossible to have it done by ink at all. And I just figured, well, I'm going to try to pencil as tight as possible and send it in to DC without Michel inking it as a studio and pretend everything is normal and the thing is finished. and we did. And Nathan colored it. And when the book came out, I just looked at it and said, well, there is no difference. I mean, we can barely see that it's not inked. And so the next project after that was Swamp Thing, and I just for the fun of it, I asked my editor, Matt Idelson, well, what if I'm inking myself on that book? Am I getting paid more, and what is it? And he was actually giving me a page rate which was higher than what they were getting Michel to ink me for real, for not doing anything different than just penciling, but digitally, and being a little bit careful here and there. And so I said, all right, I'm going to ink myself then. And especially because it was Swamp Thing, I figured if my inking is not up to the level, because I never inked myself before that, I can always pretend this is a stylistic experiment because it's Swamp Thing. It's got to be organic and more fuzzy. But yeah, it turned out that those 2 years of Swamp Thing, I've learned a lot, and I became more solid as an inker. I mean, if you look at my inking very tightly, it's not that great, but it does the job. And plus, it allows me to do stuff which was, I mean, if I would do some of those intricate thing I'm doing now in pencil and giving it to an inker, it was just torture for them. I mean, it's not fair, because I'm getting compensated for these pages a lot more than inker are. But they spend the same amount of time. So at least now I know I'm not putting anybody in trouble by adding this extra layers of building and stuff like that. It's just my own fault. And after that, nobody else is going to suffer, except for Nathan. But Nathan can take it, I guess. I hope.
So then you do 100% of your inks now?
Yeah, I use a Wacom Cintiq, the last one, which is like a 4K thing. It's just a beauty. And I'm opening the script on my Cintiq table, and I'm using now Manga Studio and not Photoshop, which is almost the same thing. And then I do all my stuff on a blank document. I will do my layout on a blank document at a lower resolution, because sometimes it's easier to move stuff around. There's no lag. And then when I'm kind of happy with the layout of things, I'm blowing that stuff up to the resolution I'm going to do my ink, and that's it. So I do all my and it's very easy to fix stuff up, and also it's the only real way I feel comfortable inking. I remember when I was when I was starting really, I was penciling stuff, and I was somehow happy with whatever it looked like, and then it was time for inking, and I would just get these panic attack, really, just had the idea of ruining everything with my ink, and I would try to ink but too slowly for my own good, and then stuff would just look bad, and I would try to fix it with white, and then it would destroy everything. It looked terrible, and then I would go to bed like thinking about my drawing that I just destroyed, and I would go back to my drawing table trying to fix stuff, making stuff worse, and then going back to bed. No, I should never have done that. And this is not this is not a happy life. With this, I mean, if I mess something up, I just Control Z the thing, or I just try things on other layers, and if it just don't make sense, I just delete that layer. So, and most of the time it makes sense because as I discovered, the power of inking is really this weird self-confidence that you need to have. You need to go in there without any just going to town with the thing. And to need to work fast so you get the line as fluid as possible. Hesitation is usually counterproductive and will give you something, less precise, bizarrely. So all the great anchor, some people like Mark Farmer, for instance, you look at this long, elegant brush stroke. I mean, he's not thinking half the way through his brush stroke. Am I missing my? No, he's just going, as a single stroke of full confidence, and that's how it's great. So that my only way to doing those kind of thing is to always know that I have this safety net of whatever. I can always Control Z everything and start again. And sometimes I'll do it. I'll do like a stroke like 5 times until I get something. Oh yeah, that's the one, and that's the one I keep. But all the others, I mean, there's no whiteout or anything. They're just being like deleted as I was doing them.
An insight on how you put everything together. So this week's, as of the time we're recording this, today's issue of Batman, how did this come together? You working on Batman with Tom King?
Yeah, well, I've always been a big fan of Tom. I think he has a wonderful instinct, and he's a great writer. And maybe because, I was working with Grant Morrison on Wonder Woman Earth 1, which is very, how can I put that? Impressionistic as a story. I mean, Grant Morrison can do very structuralistic type story, very solid, but sometimes he can do a very not ambiguous, but open to interpretation type material. And that was really what Wonder Woman Earth 1 is kind of is. And I was looking at Tom's work, and everything can be structurally sound, and this love for the 9-panel grid. There is some sort of a math brain at work there that I found just intriguing and fun. So being between Wonder Woman Earth 1's, one of my goal was to get to do something with Tom, whatever, it could be anything, but I was just aiming for that. And a Batman option came along, and he asked me what kind of thing I like to draw. And the beauty is, because it's part of the nightmare. It's pronounced like nightmare, right? It's just not spelled the same. I don't know. I mean, I'm French Canadian, so maybe it's an entire new pronunciation. But because of the nature of those stories, it could really just adapt to the needs and the instinct and the way his artist works. And so he asked me what I want to do, and I said, well, I like monsters, obviously, but I like dream, I like weird oniric type universe. When I like the Catwoman and that type of the relationship around all this, and so he created a script which was so open for me to do whatever. But the script, most of it was just Catwoman and Batman and a bit of dialogue, but the only description was like they're dancing, panel after panel after panel for pages and pages, with sometimes a little She's wearing that costume because we go to like different era for Catwoman costume. But for the most part, every single panel was the same description. And at first I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm going to do with this. It's just this. But it's obvious that it's so much freedom for me to go to town with layouts and try to be inventive. Well, because it's so repetitive in some way, it just gives me all the rope I needed to create this elaborate design for every panel. And because it's a dance, one of my childhood thing beside NSYNC was music. I used to, and still to this day, I write classical music. So like Baroque fugue and stuff like that. So I always kind of love the act of writing music. And because I can read music, which not that many people do, as I found out eventually, reading music and reading comics is very similar. In both cases, you give the reader the control over time. I mean, you can take a page of full action and spend 2 hours just looking at a page where the action is a fraction of a second, but just enjoying the drawing, but knowing that this is just happening like in a flash. Same thing when you read music, you can spend 30 minutes just looking at the orchestration of a chord on orchestra that, this is just an orchestral hit and it just moves super fast to the next chord, but you can take your own time because that's the aspect you're in control with. This is something you don't get watching a film unless you're very annoying with your remote control or something. But it's not something that is quite obvious in listening to music or in a play. It is something that is common to comics and music. And to me, when I write music, I just organize element in time. And when I draw a comic, I organize stuff in space. But it's the same values are there. I love Baroque, complex, layered music. I love complex, layered type illustration and paneling. I'm the same artist, whatever artistic form I'm expressing. And sometimes when I do breakthroughs in my writing and music, I can very easily import those same breakthroughs in comic. And so I'm there with this dance. Every panel is a dance. And I thought, maybe I can try to mix those things even more. I mean, making a dance as a musical form, writing a score, a dance score with dancing panel to panel. In the dreams, I can do all sort of bizarre, bringing some musical notation in it. And so the first panel is a song that Tom used early on in the run, which is You're Gonna Miss Me. Gotta actually take the comic. What is it? You guys tell me?
Well, I'm trying to remember
Some
what the
of
name
These
of it
Days.
is.
Yeah, it's called Some of These Days. And it's an old song from the 40s, I think. So I looked it up on the internet and I've listened to it and I made a transcription of it on paper, on a musical software. And then I used musical font to create a graphic element. But it's the same song that is mentioned in the script that is quoted. But you can read music that nobody does,
That is brilliant, because the fact that just the fact that the musical bars are there really makes the issue. The fact that as we go through the issue, they're dancing while they speak to each other, and it's all these kind of really atypical sorts of paneling. The way that those musical notes are incorporated in there really makes it look really cool, but it's another step further that it's actual music, that you actually broke it all down and that's the actual music there.
Yeah, it's the actual song that is being quoted all over the book. And the first panel of the book is a G key, G clef, whatever. What you called it. And this is the first panel. And the last thing of the book is a double bar, the way you do when you write music. So in between those two, the key and the last, it's the full issue and the dance is starting and being completed. So I don't know how many people love Batman and also can read music. maybe four, but they're going to enjoy that. And for the rest, maybe for the other people, maybe on a subliminal level, they feel that there's something binding thematically all of this together. And so the book is divided into two dens, really. It's Batman and Catwoman working out a way out of the dream while discussing and dancing in a very classical, romantic sort of way in different setting. Counterpoint with a naked Thomas, not totally naked. This guy, yeah, the decency to have some pants, which is great because I don't know would have survived it just storytellingly. And naked Bane, I don't know. Bane loves it to fight it naked.
Yeah,
and so
everything.
Yeah, for some reason. So extra level of difficulty to just always add junks and stuff like that. We had enough drama with Batman and penises in recent history, so that had to be taken in consideration. But they also dance in a way, they fight for a bunch of pages, almost the same amount. It's 50-50. And so by contrast, his pages, every panel is like just square. There's no poetic thing. There's no effect. There's no beauty. It's just like raw squarish panel on black gutters, panel borders, and that's all there is. And again, this is on purpose, just to act as some sort of a counterbalance to the dream aspect, so people will feel, oh, this is two interpretation of dance in a very different graphic language.
Further to the musical component of this issue, I think it's worth mentioning that you do have a Reverb Nation page where people can hear some of your music.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm by no means I'm a composer for real, but some of the stuff I do, I was doing it. It's just for me, Like people would do crossword puzzle, I write fugues, so just. But I've posted some stuff online that people can have fun with. I remember when I was doing Swamp Thing, I think issue 7 and 8. That was during Christmas, and I had a little bit of time for me. And it's a huge battle of Swamp Thing going through, like an army of rock monster. And the break that I was taking during the process of drawing it was to write the score of that same scene, but like for full orchestra. And I think that's available online. It's my Swamp Thing orchestral score.
Yeah, it's the first song on the page, if I remember right.
Yeah, and so I did create a Swamp Thing theme and a rock theme and a very John Williams way of approaching a score, where you create thematic melody for character and element of the story. So I did that, and then a bit of battle and crashing cymbal and drums and things. But yeah, I mean, I used to work. I used to write a lot more, but nowadays, comics is just taking all my energy, and I have less and less time. I'm afraid.
Aside from the Leviathan stuff, what else can we expect to see you on upcoming?
It's hard to say. I'm exclusive to DC, so it's going to be a DC thing. I'm talking with a few people about a few things, and I'm trying to find out something that would fit my lifestyle, I would say. A monthly book. I mean, when Batman came out, a lot of people say, "Oh, how come what Yanick is not on a monthly thing, and we want more of it?" I just don't want to do that. I mean, it's too much work. It's I'm not a young guy anymore. I need time to, especially with the bar that I've put to myself, where I really need to reflect on pages and finding conceptual element. I just need time to do those things and to be satisfied with the comics that I've been producing. So monthly is out of the equation. So it makes finding a project that fits my need a little bit more complex. But there's a few options here and there, maybe a fill-in or two. But yeah.
Will you be doing
I just can't talk about?
Will you be doing a volume 3 of the Wonder Woman Earth 1, or?
Yeah, maybe. Grant already has some sort of a game plan for that. The only problem with Earth One is that it takes forever to draw, and so much energy goes into those books. And um, yeah, the first one was took forever. The second one was a little bit faster, so I'm assuming that a third volume would go much faster. But still, I mean, it's such a commitment that and when I do those things, I just disappear for people think I'm dead or whatever, and I do a few covers but it creates a situation where people have no idea I do comics anymore, and so I felt like okay, I need to do like a good chunk of regular project, out there. And this is what that Batman is about. Or I did an action comic with Bendis earlier last year. And Leviathan, in a way, was supposed to be just like a simple thing, but now it's has grown into this massive 40 pages. But yeah, these are my kind of project for now. But I'm looking for maybe a miniseries or maybe a DC Black Label. Who knows?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that. Sounds like Black Label would be kind of perfect to do like a bi-monthly or something.
Yeah, bi-monthly is acceptable for me and to survive. But yeah, the best would be to work on a project for a year or 6 months and then have it all out in a go. Maybe, I mean, I think this is the way everything should be done. Maybe it's my European streak talking, but producing the level of material people expect nowadays on the monthly level is kind of it's crazy a little. I mean, you need to either forfeit your life or do so many compromise on the actual artwork. I think nobody was really winning in these things. So my idea was like, let's just create project. Let's the artists figure, the time they need, take their time, do the best they can, and then when it's all done, you sell it. Like books. But that's not exactly how we work in comics. We most of the time we announce stuff but nothing is done, and then we need to meet those deadlines. And it makes sense on a so in a monthly book, people expect Batman to come out every month or now twice a month, and that's okay for those type of books. But I would preferably want to have many projects that surprise, this awesome book that Kevin Nolan and Garcia Lopez have been doing in secret for 6 years is there, and it's a 24 issue awesomeness with no compromise, and it's all gonna come out twice a month because it's already all done and in the can, and nobody's gonna suffer the deadline, and everybody's gonna win. So this is the kind of future I want for comics, in which I would be very happy to produce stuff in. But this long-term thinking, DC and Warner is a little bit more inclined to do it, and that's a good thing. It's probably why I'm sticking with these guys. Marvel has a reaction time which is much faster than that, and thinking, let's start project, and we're gonna actually cash on those projects in 4 or 5 years. This is not their business model at all. I don't think they can do it, and maybe it make no sense because they need to take advantage of fad and take advantage of this is what the market is reacting now to, and we need to fill that with a product, and they have no idea what's gonna happen in 4 or 5 years, and maybe they're gonna create a project that doesn't resonate with anybody by the time it's done. So there you go. But books, movies, they've done like that. They take time, and eventually you can announce it. You can tease the stuff like a year in advance. And product like Earth One, which made total sense for my European sensibility of production. And so are these DC Black Label. So I want more of that.
Yeah, I hope DC Black Label prevails, because I know it's been a bumpy start, but I think it could be a phenomenal, just an amazing publication if they could get through this storm and just keep putting out that kind of material, and in that large format too, would be.
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, Batman Nam was awesome. I mean, that was a great book, and oh yeah, it did create a little bit of storm, but it was a totally,
it felt like a European comic, right? Like
yeah, and it made total sense for me at least.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't have the same sensibility of American toward dicks and stuff, but to me, I just thought it was awesome. But yeah, it got tainted with this at first, and there was a bit of timing because we got like not a new publisher, but a new director at the time coming in, and the first thing she got on her table was that drama, the first day of work. So,
my god!
And so it was like, oh well, maybe
timing.
we're gonna can the entire idea, but What's Scott's stuff with Greg? Batman, Last
Night on Earth, I think.
Yeah, Last Night. Well, that thing was just, I'm pretty sure it's going to reset the clock on the whole thing. And just say, okay, it's just going to bring back, because now we just have one Black Label out, and it is this great book, which is drenched into this, I guess, to my view, a little bit stupid drama. But now we're going to get a book that is just going to do well and establish the brand. And this is the way forward for sure. I remember when I was doing Batman Inc., almost by accident, DC did that sort of long-term project with Batwoman. You remember the G.H. Williams Batwoman, the New 52? Yeah. So at the time before the New 52, that thing was supposed to come out about at the same time as Batman Inc. #1, and the third issue, I think we have a crossover with Batwoman, and I saw all those pages back then, but the GH felt he had created enough lead, and he was trying to pull against the schedule a little bit, and then they announced the new 52, and that meant that Batwoman #1 and 2 and 3 would come out, and then they would reset everything, like everything had to be reset, and then create again Batwoman #1 and Batwoman #2 after 4 issue or something like that. So what they choose to do instead, they said, well, let's Jim produce those pages, and let's just have them pile at the office, these awesome, gorgeous Batwoman pages. And then with the New 52, when that book came out, I mean, it came out like clockwork. Every month you got the Batwoman book, and it's obviously not taking a month to do because it's just absolutely gorgeous. Well, other books like Action Comic had to go with a fill-in, and there was like all these bumpy starts for all sort of these other New 52 book, but Batwoman, because of that pass, they did it right without really wanting it. And it came out great, and it came out on time, and thanks to New 52, I guess. So
the lightning round. Is that ready?
Yeah. Okay. Let's just to start it off. Number one, what is your favorite insect?
It's gonna be the Letocerus americanus, which is a water bug that eats fish. It's a monster. It's just a terror of the pound.
Wow, that sounds creepy.
Yeah, Google it. Letocerus americanus, or Letocerus, or Letocer in French. It means Leto means deadly, and Cerus means claws. So there you go.
I'm more of a Arabian praying mantis fan myself, but
nice, very nice.
Do you prefer New York style pizza or Chicago style deep dish pizza?
That's a good one. Honestly, I love them both, but I've been blown away by some of the Chicago craziness they've done. I've been blown away by some of it. I'm just saying. But when we do New York, we've been to, I can't remember the names of the place, but it's a tradition to ask the locals, okay, where's the best pizza, and then try it. So I've been exposed to good stuff.
Yeah, that sounds good. The M&M candies, do you prefer the regular or the peanut?
I don't eat that much.
Not that much.
I know it's. I'm not a bit. Let's go for peanuts. That's probably more.
That's a good.
It's probably better in a way for your health. So let's get these guys.
Okay, if you could have dinner with one human being that lived throughout history, dead or alive, any human that lived, who would it be?
Oh boy, a dinner.
Wow. In a conversation with any human being that lived.
You know, I would. My first instance was Bach.
Oh, okay. Nice.
But I wouldn't have anything to say. And I would go more emotional. I will choose my father, actually, which died when I was 12.
Wow.
And I was a kid. So now I'm a man. So maybe, I see a dinner where we could actually talk about things for real.
That's a good.
So there we go.
That's the new best answer ever.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Cloning. I would clone me, and I would be doing monthly books.
There we go.
Maybe twice a month. I'll take over Batman alone twice a month.
I like to ask this one. Professionally, what's the best advice you were ever given, and who gave you that advice?
Ooh, I think that's gotta be Charles Vess. Is that Charles Vess? When I was trying to draw at the time, I was under the influence because at the time, Image was big and Jim Lee was a thing, and I was doing all these. It turned out it's part Jim, but it's mostly Scott William type of inking, and all my generation was under the charm and the spell of let's render everything with these cross hatching everywhere, and Charles Vess looked at my stuff, and I don't know if you know Charles, but he's the most gentle, soft-spoken guy, and he just looked and said, always consider shape and form. That's all he said. Shape and form. And to this day, when I do stuff that makes barely any sense, or I try to, is that a shape or a form? What is it? Oh, it's just like bullshit. So I try to avoid it. It's just a crazy rendering. But yeah, shape and form. Instead of in the phrase, it's just two things.
Shape and form.
Shape and form.
Very good. And our final question has to do with a new tradition here. What happens is every guest gives us a question to ask the next guest, and then that current guest gives us a question to ask the next guest. So the previous guest is the current Detective Comics artist Brad Walker, and he asks, if you're walking your dog and you're cleaning up poop with a bag, and you could feel the heat from the poop through the bag, are the particles getting through the bag on your hands or not? I know.
They're not. They're not.
They're not.
That's a question.
No,
they're not. I would say that
that's
they
the
are
correct
contained.
answer too. Yeah, that's someone actually explained it to us on social media, the physics behind it, and we're like, but you got it right.
Brad further explained that where his question comes from is that he always, because he draws with his right hand, he picks up with his left hand. Yeah. So that after he does he doesn't do anything with that hand until he can go and wash it, because he feels like his hand is dirty.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
So now
I have no respect for my extremities. I'll do anything with my hands. I'll do renovation. I'll pick up food with both hands if needed. When I was younger and I was doing insect stuff, I would just capture bees and these kind of insect with my hands, and they would sting, and I would try and I would put it in a jar without any net or whatever. So I was not allergic, thank God, because I would never be there. But I got no respect.
So you have to give us a question.
Oh my God!
For our next guest.
All right. Okay. It's more fundamental though. Kraft dinners and macaroni and cheese. Is it the kind of thing you need a spoon or a fork to eat?
Oh.
And I know what I do. I know what I do, but I think it might not be the good thing. Maybe it is. I'm using a spoon, but I wonder if this is like the rule for everyone.
That's
Might
really
be have
good.
to. Might be something to use a spork for.
I know they're gonna say sport. Yeah.
That's about
Fork.
A spoon with the pointy end, so it's like a spoon and a fork.
You know, lazy
wow.
us lazy Americans. We can't pick up two different utensils, so we need to put it all in one.
Wow, I didn't know. I
Yanick-
need to look on Amazon to
Yannick's mind is blown right now.
But
All right.
But Yanick, thank you so much for your time. You have so much awesome insight in terms of your journey in the world of DC Comics and all that you've done for the big two. I mean, wow, you've done so much work with so many different writers that most haven't even had a chance to work with one on. That it's pretty impressive. So yeah, we just want to thank you so much for your time and giving us a little insight into your workflow and all you've done and everything like that.
It's a pleasure, guys. No problem.